is that never before have all 5 nominees for the Best Supporting Actor been nominated for the very first time.
And those gentlemen are...
Richard Jaeckel.
When Hollywood needed someone to play the soldier who wouldn't flinch, the cop who never blinked, or the loyal friend standing just outside the spotlight, they called Richard Jaeckel. He wasn't flashy, but he was unforgettable. Whether it was Salvage 1, Baywatch, or Little House on the Prairie, Jaeckel didn't just act, he lived in his roles. Gritty, raw, and real, his face was a fixture on screen from the 1950s through the 80s. And then, just like that, he vanished. How does a man who seemed to be in everything slowly fade from Hollywood's memory? What happened to the actor who gave so much and asked for so little in return? Richard Jaeckel's story is one of talent, resilience, and heartbreak. And once you know how it all ended, you'll never forget him again. The face behind the name. When Hollywood needed someone who didn't flinch, didn't fold, and didn't fake toughness, the one name that quietly carried the weight was Richard Jaeckel. He didn't try to be a heartthrob. He didn't chase magazine covers or walk red carpets for the flashbulbs. But his face was everywhere. War dramas, westerns, courtroom thrillers, sci-fi flicks, and police procedurals. Jaeckel didn't just appear in them. He anchored them. Jaeckel played tough guys with a lived-in edge, soldiers, lawmen, cowboys, misfits, always a supporting actor, yet never forgettable. Despite decades of screen time, the big spotlight mostly passed him by. Still, his performances quietly carved out something that few in Hollywood manage: respect without noise. Fame? That wasn't the goal either. And yet somehow, his face was everywhere. You'd be flipping through channels or watching a gritty war movie, and there he was again. Tough as nails, no nonsense, always believable. Jaeckel became the go-to guy for roles that needed backbone. But for all his screen time, decades of it, Hollywood never really gave him the recognition he truly earned. Jaeckel was born on October 10, 1926, in Long Beach, New York. His father, also named Richard Jaeckel, worked in the family fur business, while his mother, Millicent Hanley, had a background in theater. His birth name was R. Hanley Jaeckel, just the initial, not a full first name. When he was a young boy, the family lived in New York, but in 1934, they relocated to Los Angeles after his father took charge of the West Coast branch of the fur business. He attended the Harvey School and a handful of private schools before graduating from Hollywood High School, a fitting start for a future screen regular. Jaeckel was short, tough, and carried himself with a quiet intensity that made him perfect for hard-edged roles. He got into the business by sheer luck and a bit of destiny. At just 17 years old, he was working as a mailboy at 20th Century Fox when a casting director spotted him and gave him a shot. That shot became his screen debut in Guadalcanal Diary, 1943. A gritty World War II film that set him on a path to becoming one of the most recognizable character actors of the century. After a brief pause in his rising career to serve in the United States Merchant Marine from 1944 to 1946, Jaeckel returned with a vengeance. By 1949, he was turning up in 2 of the decade's most iconic war films, Battleground and Sands of Iwo Jima, the latter starring the legendary John Wayne. And although many of his early roles were small, they always landed. Case in point, The Gunfighter, where he was gunned down by Gregory Peck's character in the very first scene. It was blink and you'll miss it, but he made it count. In 1952, Jaeckel landed a juicy supporting role in Comeback Little Sheba, starring Shirley Booth, who won an Oscar for her performance, Burt Lancaster and Terry Moore. He played Turk, the rumor's volatile boyfriend, and gave the role a menacing edge that added tension to the domestic drama. Then came the westerns, and Jaeckel fit into cowboy boots as if he'd been born in them. In Flaming Star, he played Angus Pierce alongside Elvis Presley in a story that blended family conflict with frontier grit. But it was The Dirty Dozen that truly cemented his place in movie history. As Sergeant Clyde Bohren, the tough, no-nonsense second-in-command to Lee Marvin's Major Reisman, Jaeckel was electric, stoic, loyal, and ready to do what had to be done. Nearly 2 decades later, he reprised that role in the 1985 sequel, The Dirty Dozen. Next Mission, a rare second shot in a business that rarely hands out sequels to supporting actors. Director Robert Aldrich clearly valued Jaeckel's work. He cast him in multiple projects over the years: Big Leaguer, Attack, Ulzana's Raid, and Twilight's Last Gleaming, 1977. In every film, Jaeckel delivered consistent, grounded performances. Never flashy, but always solid. Television couldn't get enough of him either. In the 1950s, he began popping up on TV screens in everything from legal dramas to Western anthologies. In 1954, he played a boxer on The Public Defender, and then appeared as Billy the Kid in Stories of the Century, holding his own in the gunslinger mythos. By 1961, he was playing Denver in The Tall Man, yet another cowboy outing that proved his versatility in the genre. In 1957 alone, he racked up credits in 2 episodes of the religious series Crossroads, and also appeared in Navy Log as Lieutenant Bradshaw in War of the Whaleboats. Around that same period, he had multiple roles on the West Point Story, adding military gravitas to a series about cadet life. It seemed if there was a role requiring discipline, toughness, or a weathered stare, Jaeckel was the guy you called. He also made appearances in the fantasy drama The Millionaire, the Civil War-themed Grey Ghost, Cimarron City, and The Texan. With each guest spot, he brought a lived-in believability that made the character stick, whether it was a lawman, outlaw, or soldier. The 1950s were strong, but the late 1960s through mid-1970s marked the true peak of Jaeckel's film career. He rolled through a remarkable stretch of hits and cult classics: The Devil's Brigade, Chisholm opposite John Wayne, and Sometimes a Great Notion, which earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. That performance, as a logger caught between pride, family, and tragedy, was a rare chance for Jaeckel to showcase the emotional depth he often kept buried beneath tough exteriors. The hot streak continued with Ulzana's Raid, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, The Outfit, The Drowning Pool, and Walking Tall Part 2. In Chisholm, he co-starred with Christopher George and Andrew Prine, and the chemistry was so strong they reunited 6 years later in Grizzly, a low-budget but lovable Jaws knockoff set in the forest. Jaeckel and George also teamed up again in Day of the Animals, another film where nature decided to take revenge. That same era saw him embrace the B-movie horror world with Mako, The Jaws of Death, where he played a man with a psychic bond to sharks. Cheesy? Sure. But Jaeckel treated every role with respect and seriousness. He never phoned it in, and TV kept calling. He guest starred on Gunsmoke in the 1975 episode Larkin, playing the title role, and in 1977 appeared with Donna Mills, Bill Bixby, and William Shatner in the final episode of The Oregon Trail. A year later, he showed up in Centennial, a sprawling NBC miniseries based on James Michener's novel, playing the hard-edged Sergeant Likes. Even in ensemble casts, Jaeckel stood out. He found a steady paycheck in the short-lived but ambitious series Salvage 1, starring Andy Griffith, and later in Spencer for Hire, where he played Lieutenant Martin Quirk opposite Robert Urich. These TV roles kept him visible as he moved into the 1980s. Jaeckel wasn't just coasting. In 1984, he landed a major role in Starman, a John Carpenter film, where he played an NSA agent hunting down Jeff Bridges' alien visitor. From there, he appeared in the action thriller Black Moon Rising with Tommy Lee Jones and Delta Force 2, The Colombian Connection with Chuck Norris, always the second fiddle, always rock solid. But it was Baywatch that introduced him to a whole new generation. He first appeared as Al Gibson in the pilot, and later became Lieutenant Ben Edwards during seasons 2 through 4. Amid the sun, sand, and slow-mo running, Jaeckel brought an old-school, grounded energy that gave the show a sliver of seriousness. He was the grizzled rock in a world of glossy surfboards and lifeguard dramas. Whether it was a 10-minute role in a classic Western or a recurring part on a flashy 90s TV series, Jaeckel showed up and delivered. Always tough, always believable. He never stole scenes, but he sure anchored them. Richard Jaeckel didn't need to be the star to shine. He was the kind of actor who gave everything to his craft, even when Hollywood didn't give much back. And that's why, even now, long after the cameras stopped rolling, people still remember the name. Not because he was the loudest, but because he was one of the realest. Richard Jaeckel in Little House on the Prairie. Richard Jaeckel was known for playing tough, weathered men who had seen more than their share of life's darker edges. So when he turned up in Little House on the Prairie as Irv Hartwig, Murphy to those who knew him, it raised a few eyebrows. This was a show built on warm family values, sun-drenched fields, and frontier lessons. But Irv wasn't a cookie-cutter character. Jaeckel gave him grit, a kind of hard-won decency that didn't come wrapped in sentiment. Irv Hartwig appeared later in the series, and though his screen time was limited, he made an impression. He was a retired rail worker with a limp and a no-nonsense demeanor, who arrived in Walnut Grove carrying the quiet weight of past regrets. Murphy wasn't there to charm the town. He just wanted to be left alone. But like many of the show's most memorable characters, his rough shell was eventually chipped away by the kindness of others. What set Jaeckel's portrayal apart was his restraint. He didn't overplay the sorrow or push for sympathy. Instead, he let small gestures and silences speak. In one episode, Irv gets caught in a minor dispute with townspeople over a land matter. It's not high drama, but Jaeckel brings real tension to it, enough that even Charles Ingalls, played by Michael Landon, treats him with cautious respect. There's a moment where Irv, stooped over, tired from years of solitude, sits quietly on the porch of his cabin, watching children play nearby. He doesn't join in, he doesn't even smile, but you can tell, just by the way Jaeckel shifts his weight, that the wall's coming down. He wasn't just playing a frontiersman, he was one, stripped down to the bone. Though Jaeckel only appeared in a few episodes, his character was one of the more adult, somber presences on a show that often leaned on childhood wonder and frontier optimism. And that's what made Irv Hartwig, Murphy, stand out. He represented the ones left behind by progress, the men who carried scars no one asked about. Jaeckel didn't soften those edges. He let them stay jagged. Little House on the Prairie itself was no stranger to rough beginnings. In 1972, NBC executive-turned-producer Ed Friendly bought the rights to Laura Ingalls Wilder's books, hoping to turn them into something that felt timeless. Blanche Hanalis was brought in to write the teleplay for the pilot film. When Friendly pitched it to Michael Landon, who was fresh off his run as Little Joe on Bonanza, Landon agreed, but only if he could direct and star as Charles Ingalls. That arrangement quickly became a tug-of-war. Friendly wanted a more educational, historically accurate tone. Landon wanted emotion, character-driven stories, and a strong central patriarch. It didn't take long before Friendly was out, and Landon had full creative control. With that, Little House took on the flavor it would be known for, a deeply personal frontier saga told through one family's trials. The pilot aired on March 30th, 1974, based on Wilder's third book, Little House on the Prairie. The full series launched that September and ran strong until 1982. By the time the 9th season rolled around, Landon had stepped away from center stage, and the show rebranded itself as Little House: A New Beginning. Even after its finale, it never really went away. 3 post-series movies followed, and syndication kept it alive for new generations, along with streaming platforms that now host every tear-jerking episode. At first, critics weren't kind. Some dismissed it as the Waltons in a new hat, too sweet for its own good. But audiences knew better. They stuck around. They cried when Mary went blind. They cheered when Nellie got knocked down a peg. And they remembered characters like Murphy, grizzled, complicated, played by an actor who never once asked to be liked. While Jaeckel himself managed to avoid scandal during his decades in the business, the same couldn't be said for some of his Little House co-stars. The show may have looked like a sepia-toned postcard, but behind the scenes there were arguments over direction, pay disputes, and bruised egos. Michael Landon, for all his talent and charisma, was known to run a tight ship. Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls, would later speak openly about their professional tensions. Others, like Melissa Sue Anderson, Mary, found the environment stifling at times. And then there were off-camera rivalries and jealousies that no one dared to name back then, but which cast a shadow on that perfect Prairie picture. Still, when you talk to fans, it's not the drama they remember. It's the stories and the characters who felt real. Richard Jaeckel's Irv Hartwig may not have been there from the start, and he certainly wasn't front and center, but his presence added a layer of truth to a show that sometimes needed reminding that the frontier wasn't always kind. The Little House on the Prairie controversies. What happened between Michael Landon and Karen Grassel on Little House on the Prairie was a classic case of tension simmering beneath the surface of a picture-perfect show. On screen, they were the ideal frontier couple. Charles and Caroline Ingalls, steadfast partners raising their children in the wilds of 19th century Minnesota. But behind the scenes, things were far from harmonious. Karen Grassel was a trained stage actress, fresh from New York, when she landed the role of Ma in 1973. She'd moved west looking for opportunity, scraping by with theater gigs and a crumbling marriage behind her. The Little House audition was a big deal, so big that she shelled out $40 for a wool dress and broke the no makeup rule with a hint of brown eyeshadow. It worked. Michael Landon, already famous from Bonanza, jumped up after her audition and shouted, "Send her to wardrobe!" Just like that, she was in. At first, Grassel respected Landon. He was talented, intense, and fully in charge of the show. He acted, directed, and shaped Little House with an iron grip, but that control came with a price. Landon was moody, vulgar, and at times cruel, especially when Grassel pushed back. The trouble started over money. After season 1, Grassel asked for a raise. She wasn't demanding stardom-level cash, just a fair rate for the co-lead of a top-rated show. Landon flat out refused. He argued that her pay should stay in line with what the child actors earned, claiming she wasn't as popular with the audience as she thought. Grassel was stunned. Not only was the logic insulting, but she felt dismissed, as if her work, her presence, and her character's importance meant nothing. From that point on, things changed. Landon gave her the cold shoulder. Her scenes were cut. She was slowly pushed to the edges of the storyline, even though she remained a central figure in the Ingalls family. The tension seeped into the work environment. Crew members would laugh along when Landon mocked her during playback sessions, imitating her facial expressions or making jokes about her figure. Grassel was humiliated, but she kept her head down, did her job, and played the part of Ma with quiet dignity. The worst moments came when they filmed bedroom scenes, modest by TV standards, but intimate enough that professionalism mattered. Instead, Landon would turn crude. Grassel recalled him blurting out graphic jokes in front of the mostly male crew. He used slurs, made vulgar remarks about women's bodies, and fed off the laughter of others. Grassel felt paralyzed. It was the 70s, and women were used to being demeaned in the industry. Speaking out wasn't easy. She stayed quiet, kept things professional, and hoped it would pass. But it didn't. Landon's behavior became a pattern. He controlled everything, from storylines to cast dynamics. If you crossed him or stood up for yourself, you paid the price. Grassel didn't just feel underappreciated, she felt erased. All the while she was struggling privately with alcohol. Her life was unraveling in ways that mirrored her past. Her father had been a suicidal alcoholic. Now she was drinking too much herself, crying, blacking out, and taking risks she didn't fully remember. In one instance, after downing drinks at the airport, she boarded a plane, flirted with the man next to her, and went home with him. "I was a mess," she later admitted, but she kept it together just enough to keep showing up on set. Grassel stayed with the show until 1982. Despite everything, she delivered consistent, moving performances. But the damage, professional and personal, lingered. Years later, in her memoir Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, she wrote candidly about the hostility she faced from Landon and how it impacted her career and self-worth. She wasn't bitter, but she was honest. Landon may have built Little House, but his treatment of Grassel behind the scenes was far from the wholesome values the show projected. In the end, Karen Grassel's story is one of survival. She weathered toxic power dynamics, battled addiction, and lived through decades of silence. When she finally told her story, she didn't do it for revenge. She did it to tell the truth and reclaim her voice. And while Michael Landon has mostly never been portrayed well by co-stars, Richard Jaeckel was different. Co-stars described him as hard-working and jovial. Richard Jaeckel's personal life and death. On May 29, 1947, Richard Jaeckel married Antoinette Helen Marches in a quiet ceremony in Tijuana, Mexico, a modest beginning to a marriage that would last for 50 years. The couple had 2 sons, Barry and Richard Jr., and while Jaeckel's name lit up movie credits and television screens for decades, he remained fiercely devoted to his family behind the scenes. Hollywood may have known him as the rugged everyman, the dependable supporting player who could ground a scene with a single look, but at home, he was simply a husband and a father, steady, present, and deeply loyal. In his final years, Jaeckel fought a private and difficult battle with melanoma, a form of skin cancer. Though the illness took a toll, he never let bitterness take hold. He remained calm, grounded, and gracious, just as he had always been. When the end came, it did so quietly. On June 14, 1997, at the age of 70, he passed away at the Motion Picture and Television Country House and Hospital in Woodland Hills, California. For an actor who gave so much to the screen, it was a fittingly humble setting, a place that had long served as a refuge for the unsung craftsmen of the industry. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy endures in a different way, one not carved into statues or cemented on red carpets, but in the memories of audiences who, even if they didn't always know his name, never forgot his face. Jaeckel was never the star on the marquee. He didn't need to be. He built his career not on flash, but on substance, the kind that made a scene feel real, the kind that elevated stories beyond the surface. He was the actor who made his co-stars better, the one who gave weight to a moment without ever demanding attention. You believed him because there was no performance in it, just truth. A grizzled Marine, a loyal ranch hand, a weary deputy, a conflicted blue-collar man caught in impossible choices. He brought a lived-in honesty that couldn't be faked. Over more than 5 decades, Richard Jaeckel appeared in over 150 films and television productions. His career stretched across every genre. War epics like The Dirty Dozen, 1967, where he played the hardened Sergeant Bowron with icy precision. Westerns like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973. Gritty dramas like Sometimes a Great Notion, 1971, where his portrayal of the doomed brother earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. There was also Starman Grizzly, 3:10 to Yuma, The Gunfight at Dodge City, and a slew of unforgettable television appearances on shows like Baywatch, Bonanza, Gunsmoke, and the FBI. His range was staggering. He could play a man of action or a man of quiet torment, a villain or a wounded hero, all with equal skill. And through it all, he stayed grounded. Never boxed in by the industry, never typecast for long. He was one of the few actors who could move between A-list projects and B-movies without losing his edge. His performances weren't about ambition, they were about commitment. He was a workhorse, plain and simple. Yet those who knew him best remember a different kind of farewell. His sons, Barry and Richard Jr., later spoke of a father who never complained. Even as his illness worsened, he remained steady and strong. He didn't fear the end, he accepted it. And while Hollywood may have largely forgotten him by the time he passed, his family never did. Nor did the fans who continued to rediscover his work in late-night reruns and classic movie channels. It wasn't just his death that was quiet, it was the decades leading up to it. There were no scandals, no Hollywood meltdowns, no attention-grabbing interviews or ego-driven fallouts, just consistent, disciplined work. The kind that rarely gets celebrated but always matters. He was the kind of actor that kept the wheels of cinema turning, the kind that doesn't win the Oscar, but makes sure the film gets made. Some of the actors who once shared scenes with him went on to win major awards, secure million-dollar deals, and enjoy long legacies etched in film history. Meanwhile, Jaeckel left this world without a mansion, without a fortune, and without the full credit he deserved. He had been the unsung backbone of countless productions, always delivering, never demanding. And in the end, it was that quiet dignity that defined him more than any headline ever could. His life didn't end in disgrace or controversy, but in something perhaps harder to swallow: obscurity. And for a man who gave everything to his craft, that obscurity felt almost cruel. But the story doesn't stop there, because what Richard Jaeckel's life revealed, and what it continues to reveal, is the hard truth about Hollywood's forgotten heroes. When people look back on the so-called golden years of American cinema, they remember the stars, the box office juggernauts, the recognizable names immortalized in award shows and walkways, but they rarely remember the Richards. And yet, without them, the machine would not have worked. Without Jaeckel, those legendary films might not have felt quite as real. He was never the face on the poster, but he was the reason the poster mattered. He brought gravity to action scenes, humanity to war films, and a quiet emotional depth to every role he played. He wasn't just a background player, he was the soul behind the spectacle. And yet, for all that, he was left behind, not because he failed, but because he never chased fame. He didn't play Hollywood politics, he didn't hire publicists to spin narratives or stage drama to keep his name in headlines. He just showed up, delivered, and moved on. In an industry that often rewards noise over nuance, Jaeckel's quiet professionalism became a double-edged sword. His story raises a hard question. Why do some actors get immortalized while others vanish into footnotes? Jaeckel gave 5 decades of his life to the screen. He earned an Oscar nomination. He stood shoulder to shoulder with icons. He earned the respect of his peers, his directors, and his audiences. And yet when he died, his name was missing from most tributes. There were no major retrospectives, no honorary Lifetime Achievement Awards, just a slow, quiet fade into memory. But for those who watched him, really watched him, Richard Jaeckel was unforgettable. For the fans who remember the intensity in his eyes, the raw emotion in his delivery, and the strength he brought to every scene, he remains a symbol of what true acting looks like. He didn't need headlines to matter. He didn't need a spotlight to shine. All he needed was a camera, and when it was on, he gave everything. Colleagues often described him as one of the most dependable actors they had ever worked with. Humble to a fault, always on time, always prepared. He wasn't trying to be a star. He was just trying to get it right. Directors respected him, co-stars trusted him, and audiences may not have always remembered his name, but they remembered how he made them feel. Richard Jaeckel remains one of the great unsung heroes of American film, a consummate character actor who helped define what supporting roles could be: rich, textured, and unforgettable. His strength was in the details, in the silences between lines, in the steady human pulse he brought to every frame. So the next time you find yourself flipping through channels and you see him, maybe in uniform, maybe on horseback, maybe staring down danger with that quiet, unwavering stare, pause. Because that man, the one whose name you might not know, was one of the finest to ever do it. Richard Jaeckel didn't just act, he embodied, he endured. And long after the spotlight moved on, his work remains, steady, true, and quietly brilliant. Have you ever seen any movie or TV series with Richard Jaeckel in it? Tell us in the comments below. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.